This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's top 10, I'm looking at cards that have a color identity of all 5 colors, sometimes called WUBRG or Rainbow. I'll be going with the former in this video. If a card involves all 5 of Magic's colors, it tends to be pretty powerful, since it's so hard to make it work in your average deck. So, to have a WUBRG color identity, a card had all 5 mana symbols appear somewhere on the card. This can mean in the casting cost or the text box. Cards with an identity of all 5 colors aren't a regular thing. In the 27-year history of Magic, there's only 63 cards that fit the bill. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on tournament Magic. I was motivated to make this list because it seems like several cards with a WUBRG identity have been making waves in Magic's very recent history, and I was curious where they would rank. Alright, before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Invitational, Legacy Championship, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest Top 8 is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, I have Obelisk of Alara. This artifact is a Swiss Army knife. Provided you have access to all 5 colors, it can do just about anything. Need life to get out of range of dying to an opponent? Check. Need to dig through your library for an answer? That's covered too. Need to kill a small creature? Done. Need to lightning strike something? Yep, it can do that too. How about pumping one of your creatures so it can do lethal? Sure. The great thing is that all of these abilities cost only 2 mana, and you have the threat of activation of all of them at any time you're, well, doing anything. Obelisk of Alara's 1 point came in a 5-color control deck at Grand Prix Barcelona in 2009. This was a deck built around making the game go long and playing silly, powerful, but mana-intensive cards, and Obelisk of Alara is definitely that. At number 9, it is Horde of Notions, which is technically tied with Obelisk of Alara since both have 1 point from a Grand Prix, but I gave the Horde the edge because it's played a lot more in EDH. The Horde is a big scary elemental with powerful keywords, which also lets you cast elementals from your graveyard for free, provided you can pay 1 mana of each color. As you probably expected, the Horde's 1 point came in an elemental tribal deck at the Lorwyn Block constructed Grand Prix in 2008. At number 8, I've included 2 cards, Sliver Queen and Sliver Legion. I included these 2 together for fairly obvious reasons, given that they are both 5-color slivers. The Legion is technically tied with Horde of Notions and Obelisk of Alara, while Sliver Queen is the real number 7. The Queen gives you a huge body for the investment and can then churn out slivers with her activated ability. Generally, you'll have other slivers in play, and that will make the 1/1 sliver a lot scarier than it might seem. The story of Sliver Queen's 1 Pro Tour Top 8 is kind of a funny one. You might think that it had its points come in a sliver deck, but it didn't. Instead, it came in a 5-color toolbox deck that used survival of the fittest. Slivers were part of the extended metagame at the time, and older slivers generally buffed the whole board. So you could grab your Sliver Queen against sliver opponents and beat them at their own game. It could also be a win condition for the deck if necessary. Unlike Sliver Queen, Sliver Legion was played in a sliver deck, but not a straightforward one. Instead, its 1 Grand Prix Top 8 came in a Time Spiral Block constructed sliver combo deck that utilized Wild Pair and was just filled up with 2/2 slivers who could tutor for one another. Once the deck gets Wild Pair in play, it could utilize Dormant Sliver to draw other slivers, use mana produced by Gemhide Sliver and friends to basically play the entire deck filled with slivers, since every sliver they played would trigger Wild Pair again and let you find what you needed, which included Reflex Sliver to attack right away and Frenetic Sliver to get rid of the Dormant Sliver once the job was done. Frenetic and Dormant Sliver could also result in a bunch of card draw if you needed that. Sliver decks have never found a ton of success in Constructed, and this Wild Pair Sliver deck is one of the few times where they broke through. Obviously, the Legion was one of the things you could eventually find that would give you lethal out of nowhere. At number 7, it is Channel the Suns, a card that's green but has a WUBRG color identity as a result of its ability to add WUBRG to your mana pool. Obviously enough, this is a ritual type effect that ends up netting you mana. And where do ritual effects really shine? That's right, in Storm decks. All of Channel the Sun's points came in extended Storm decks in 2008. These decks played a bunch of ritual effects, including Channel the Suns, and then would fire off a Tendrils of Agony or Mind's Desire with a huge storm count and win the game. At number 6, I have Niv Mizzet Reborn, one of the cards that got me interested in doing this list. This version of Niv has a super powerful Enter the Battlefield ability, one that will let you draw several cards in a deck that is correctly built around him. Niv Mizzet has an eponymous deck in Pioneer that is loaded up with various 2-color cards to draw when you play him. While he only has points in Pioneer so far, there are also Niv decks in Modern, and it seems likely that Niv is going to continue to accumulate points going forward. At number 5, it is Genju of the Realm. This is a pretty wacky card. It makes a land have the ability to transform into an 8/12 trampling creature. It's part of a cycle of Genjus from Kamigawa, all of which have the ability to turn a land into a creature land. The mana cost here is no joke, but the deck that played it in Standard never intended on actually casting it the normal way. Instead, these decks were built around Enduring Ideal. The next plan was to cast the Epic spell, at which point they could start pulling things out of the deck. While Form of the Dragon was the most common win condition, some versions of the deck also ran the Genju, which could speed up the opponent's clock even more quickly than Form of the Dragon, depending on the board state. At number 4, it is Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, another card from the very recent past. While Golos might be new, he has shaken up a whole lot of formats already. First, Golos has a pretty nice Into the Battlefield ability since it can search up any land, not just basic ones. Then, should you be able to pay for the activated ability, it's just crazy because it lets you cast all the spells in the top 3 cards of your library. Golos was particularly good in Standard because of the presence of Field of the Dead. The field just gives a ton of value for no mana investment, and Golos could go a long way towards getting that engine going, generally by searching up a field. This was so good that ultimately Field of the Dead got banned in both Standard and Historic. Golos also has points already in Vintage, where it's played in Mud decks, and it's also seeing some play in Legacy and Modern, but doesn't have points in those formats just yet. It seems likely that Golos is going to continue to accumulate points and move up this list. At number 3, it is Jagantha, the Wellspring. Jagantha is not the most overpowering card you've ever seen. A 5-mana 5/5 that can tap for WUBRG, that can only be used on colored mana symbols on cards is nice, but a little slow in many formats. However, the companion mechanic, even after being hosed by errata, makes all the difference. Jagantha has one of the easier companion requirements around, and there are decks that don't really have to go out of their way to run Jagantha as a companion, and when that's the case, there's no reason not to, as it just gives you free value. While the errata does require you to pay 3 mana to put it into your hand now, so it isn't quite an extra card in your hand like it was before, there's still no reason not to have Jagantha as a companion in some decks. If you flood out, it gives you something to do with your mana, and that's always nice. Sacrifice decks in both Standard and Historic can have Jagantha as a companion with no problem, and that's where all of its points have come so far. It is also seeing play in several other formats, though it doesn't have points in any of them yet. I suspect over the years it will accumulate a lot of points though, just because decks will meet the requirement without even trying. At number 2, it is Progenitus, one of the most powerful creatures in the entire game, at least in a vacuum. Progenitus is almost impossible to deal with if it ever comes into play, because it has protection from everything. Obviously, it has an incredibly difficult mana cost, but the decks it has appeared in over the years get around that by cheating it into play. There weren't good ways to do that in either Standard or Block, and as a result, Progenitus was never played in either format. In Extended, it was used in Hypergenesis decks, a deck that would ultimately have to get banned out of existence. Legacy is where Progenitus has picked up 12 of its 17 points. In that format, Progenitus has been cheated into play using Natural Order, Sneak Attack, and Show and Tell. It hasn't picked up any points in the last several years, but it's hard to ever think that Progenitus is done just because it brings so much power. And at number 1, it is Kenrith, the Returned King. We started the list with Obelisk of Alara, and Kenrith is kind of an obelisk with a body. Controversially, Kenrith was printed as a buy-a-box promo for Eldraine, meaning that you couldn't actually get the card in packs. This wouldn't have been a big deal, except for the fact that Kenrith turned out to be super well positioned in Standard, and was a card in really high demand as a result. There were 2 separate decks that could really abuse him. One of these was the various Wilderness Reclamation decks, who had plenty of mana to spare and could sink it into all of Kenrith's abilities. The other was Fires of Invention decks, which also generally had mana lying around. Since they could cast so many free spells, and couldn't cast more than 2 spells in a turn, it was just a perfect fit to have all this mana lying around. Ultimately, both of those powerful enchantments got banned out of both Historic and Standard, and Kenrith hasn't seen much play in a while as a result. Well, that does it for this list. It's kind of interesting that several recently printed cards with WUBRG identities have been played a considerable amount. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the over 300 MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.